Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wanted to know about music. So whether you're a music lover or just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. Now, especially here on the Sound Mind, we talk a lot about how powerful music is, how it can lift us up, soothe our minds, and connect us to our deepest emotions. But what happens when music becomes too much? When the constant soundtrack of our lives starts to overwhelm us rather than comfort? Well, in today's episode, we're diving into a topic that's rarely discussed: overstimulation from music, playlist fatigue, and what I like to call sonic burnout. We'll explore why sometimes even the music we love can leave us feeling drained, and why embracing silence might be the key to restoring balance. Now, I've always found these kind of topics around the quote-unquote darker side of music completely fascinating, so I'm excited to get into this one and also draw a little bit on my experiences as well, particularly as someone who does embrace music in every part of their life, and maybe you relate to that. So, in today's world of unlimited streaming, we're surrounded by music literally 24/7. It's easier than ever to hit play, whether you're working, commuting, cooking, or walking, or just trying to drown out your thoughts. With apps like Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube offering this stream of endless discovery, curated playlists, and algorithmic suggestions, the sheer volume of choice is staggering. But that abundance, while amazing, can also be quietly exhausting. And this is where playlist fatigue sets in. It's a form of emotional and cognitive burnout that stems from too much access, too many choices, and too little intention. When music becomes a constant companion, when it's always filling every gap, every silence, every second, we start to lose our emotional connection to it. Instead of music being a moment of expression or release, it ends up just becoming background noise, something passive, something we consume rather than feel. And one reason for this is that music doesn't just entertain us. It activates multiple systems in the brain. Music engages areas involved in auditory processing, emotion regulation, memory recall, and reward. And this multi-system activation is what makes music so powerful in the first place, but it also means that it can be overstimulating if used constantly. The reward system, especially something called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, is central here. Dopamine is released when we hear pleasurable music, particularly during those peak moments. So imagine like a drop or a key change. But constant stimulation of the system, especially when there's no time for recovery, can lead to what researchers call dopaminogenic downregulation. In simpler terms, the brain gets tired of being excited. And over time, this blunts our emotional response. We don't cry during sad songs the way that we used to. Maybe we don't dance as freely. And the chills or goosebumps become rare. In particular, our brain's reward system, driven by dopamine, is highly responsive to novelty and emotional resonance. So at first, that new track might feel exciting, moving, even euphoric. But when you're exposed to too much music all the time, the brain starts to adjust. The novelty fades. You become desensitized to emotional peaks. So that hit that you used to get from a powerful chorus, a nostalgic riff, or a soulful vocal, it doesn't land quite the same way anymore. And this is what we call dopamine desensitization, a kind of reward system fatigue. It's not that music stops being good, it's that your brain can't fully register its emotional weight anymore because it's already overloaded. The best analogy I can think of for this is social media. Think of how scrolling endlessly through TikTok or Instagram can leave you feeling numb. You've seen so many videos, so many memes, so many tiny emotional bursts that none of them actually stick. music can start to feel the same way. If you're constantly skipping songs, letting playlists run in the background, and never really sitting with what you're hearing, your brain doesn't actually get the chance to fully absorb it. So instead of feeling uplifted, calmed, energized, or inspired, you're just distracted, temporarily entertained. And this kind of overstimulation, it also contributes to decision fatigue, which is a psychological phenomenon where the more choices that you're faced with, the harder it becomes to make any choice at all. How many times have you opened Spotify, scrolled for 5 minutes, and then just given up or hit shuffle on something random? I know that I've definitely done that, and that's playlist fatigue in action. There's this pressure to find the perfect song, the perfect vibe, or something fresh, and it becomes tiring. Music, which used to feel intuitive and emotional, it starts to feel like a task. And faced with hundreds of playlists and recommendations, listeners often feel overwhelmed, leading to frequent skipping or defaulting to the same safe choices over and over again. Instead of discovering something meaningful, we get stuck in what researchers call the mere exposure loop, repeating what's familiar without truly enjoying it. And this loop doesn't nourish us emotionally, it just literally fills the silence. I mean, think about it. Think about how much the world of music consumption has changed and developed within the past couple of decades. It's changed from cassette tapes to vinyl records to CDs and MP3 players, and now we're in the world of streaming, which is absolutely amazing. And looking at how far we've come, that we can just have a world's worth of music library in our pockets on demand whenever we want it is absolutely incredible. And look, I worked for Spotify. I am a true advocate for streaming and I absolutely love it. But we have to admit, it's a lot of decision making to add on top of the modern lifestyle that we're living today. And it just adds another aspect of choice, which can be really difficult to navigate on a daily basis. Thinking back to a time where our collections were limited to the songs and albums that we purchased, those were all that we had access to in our collections. And I'm sure that everyone dreamt about having an infinite library back then, but everything comes with its caveats, right? But circling back to streaming and the world that we're living in today, this kind of passive listening that we often engage with, it can lead to a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. And this is where repeated exposure to pleasurable stimuli reduces its emotional impact. So just like your favorite dessert loses its magic if you eat it every day, the emotional high that you get from a song wears down with repetition and oversaturation. It does become harder to feel those feelings again. The emotional hit just fades. What's missing here is intentionality. Music works best when we choose it deliberately, when we connect with what we're hearing, not just play it on a loop. And when we allow ourselves breaks, so those moments of quiet where we can really reset our auditory system, we return to music with fresh ears and an open heart to really experience the emotions that are being communicated. So yes, even something as beautiful and simple as music can become too much if we don't give ourselves the space to truly feel it. Now, at some point, you might find yourself putting on your favorite song and feeling nothing. No spark, no comfort, no emotional pull. Maybe you start skipping every track or feel weirdly irritated by music you usually love. And when that happens, it's easy to blame yourself. Am I just tired of everything? Have I lost my taste? Myself? Am I broken? But here's the truth. It's completely normal. Just like emotional burnout in life, musical burnout is so real. If you're constantly surrounded by sound, so music in the background while you work, scroll, eat, walk, sleep even, your brain doesn't get a chance to miss it. The emotional circuits that respond to music, they start to dull, not because the music has changed, but your system is overwhelmed. And there's also that layer of guilt that can creep in. When we think of music as a source of comfort, identity, or even healing, it can feel disorienting when it stops working. But it's not a failure. It's a sign that you might need rest, recalibration, or even just a break. Now, I actually went through this. Last year, I had my lowest year yet on my Spotify Wrapped listening minutes, and I felt so guilty. Like, the guilt that came over me is crazy looking back on it, because I almost felt like I had to justify the fact that, yes, I do listen to music. I am a music psychologist. I do love music, but I just wasn't being pulled in the same way. It felt like in my daily life, I just needed those moments of silence, or I turned more to podcasts and videos to have some kind of company in that way, rather than always turning to music as I previously had. And it took me a long time to reflect on this, and I really did go through a range of complex emotions, especially because I am someone where music is such a core part of my identity, and I almost felt like an imposter just seeing those statistics back. But then I started to realize what I was going through outside of that. It was a difficult year for me. I'd lost my job. I was going through a lot of transitions in terms of moving countries and dealing with a lot of instability. And that, for me, I just felt like I needed quiet sometimes. I needed that peace. And actually, it was this revelation for me, because honestly, if you would have asked me a few years ago if I would have been able to sit in silence for even like 2 minutes of the day, the answer would have been no. And honestly, that was a huge development for me to even be comfortable with going to sit on the bus, on the train, or go for a walk, even just be at home in my apartment and just be in silence and think about the things that were going through my head and not avoiding them. And that was really a huge turning point for me. And naturally, it came back. Naturally, I started turning to music more, as I always have, but I just needed that time. And that's something I want to get into a little bit after this, is using music as an avoidance, because it's something that a lot of us do. I've been guilty of it, and I think it's something that we really need to tune into. But just like with anything that we love, I found that distance, it really can renew appreciation. So taking a step back from music just for a few hours, a day, or even longer, it doesn't mean that you're giving up on it. It means that you're allowing yourself space for your emotional palette to take a reset, so that when you return, you can actually feel something again. And that was exactly what it was like for me. So if music isn't hitting like it used to, it might not be about the song. It might be your brain's way of asking for quiet. But now getting into using music as a form of avoidance. So this is a really interesting one. Music is often described as a form of therapy, right? And for good reason. It can soothe anxiety, elevate mood, provide a sense of control, and even simulate human connection. But like any powerful emotional tool, it can also be misused. Sometimes music becomes less about emotional support and more about emotional avoidance. So instead of helping us process difficult thoughts and feelings, it helps us tune them out. And while this might bring temporary relief, over time it can actually prevent us from engaging with the very emotions that we need to heal from. Think about the last time that you felt this wave of sadness, stress, or loneliness. Did you instinctively reach for your headphones? Many of us do, and it really does make sense. Music helps regulate our emotional states and can bring immediate comfort. But if we're always reaching for it the moment that we feel discomfort, we might be using it to mask emotions rather than move through them. And this phenomenon is a form of emotional avoidance, a strategy where we distract ourselves from distressing thoughts or feelings instead of confronting them. Psychologically, avoidance is often linked with short-term mood improvements, but long-term emotional stagnation. You feel better right now, but the underlying issue remains unresolved. In psychology, experiential avoidance refers to efforts to avoid negative thoughts, memories, or sensations, even when doing so creates harm in the long run. In this context, music becomes like an emotional anesthetic, almost. It dulls the pain, but it doesn't address the wound. And there's a critical difference between managing your emotions and avoiding them. Music can help us process emotions by giving them shape. So think of sad songs that help you cry or angry songs that maybe help you vent. But it can also be used to numb emotions, especially if you're constantly listening to upbeat or distracting tracks to escape feeling anything at all. This is particularly relevant in the age that we're living in of algorithmic playlists and always-on soundtracks. When silence becomes uncomfortable, we almost start using music like a shield. There's one quote that I love by Dr. Susan David, who's a Harvard psychologist and the author of an amazing book called Emotional Agility. But she says that discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And I absolutely love that, because avoiding discomfort through constant stimulation, even beautiful stimulation like music, it can block emotional growth. In fact, a 2015 study found that people who habitually use music to distract from negative moods, rather than reflect or process them, were more likely to experience maladaptive emotional outcomes, such as rumination or low mood. And this suggests that music, when used to suppress emotions, may actually maintain or even worsen emotional distress over time. Now, it's easy to assume that music is always helpful, but even healthy coping tools can become crutches when overused. So if you find yourself unable to fall asleep, sit in silence, or walk without headphones, it might be worth asking yourself, what am I avoiding? Silence, while uncomfortable, it does serve a purpose. It creates space for reflection, integration, and self-awareness. The brain's default mode network, which activates during periods of rest and quiet, is involved in autobiographical memory, emotional processing, and sense of self. And without those moments of stillness, we deprive ourselves of that mental and emotional reset. One powerful study found that 2 hours of silence per day led to the development of new brain cells in the hippocampus, which is a region in the brain linked to memory and emotional regulation. So, in other words, silence doesn't just rest the brain, it actually repairs it. And yet, in modern life, silence often feels threatening. Many of us, myself included, fill every gap with sound because we're afraid of what will surface when it's gone. But healing sometimes requires that we feel the silence, that we let the thoughts rise, let the grief emerge, and let the loneliness speak so that we can process rather than distract. Now, here's a question for you. Have you ever felt drained by music? Like I said earlier, maybe you put on your favorite playlist and suddenly it felt like noise. Or maybe you realized that you hadn't sat in silence for days, or maybe even weeks. Maybe deep down, the music wasn't helping anymore. It was just filling a void. And if that sounds familiar, I just want you to know that you're not alone. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is pause the music, take your headphones off, and just sit with whatever comes up. It might feel heavy at first, but it might also be the beginning of something truly healing. Like I said, music is a powerful emotional tool, but like any tool, it depends on how we use it. When we use music to reflect, to feel, and move through our emotions, it can be absolutely transformative. But when we use it to escape or suppress, it can quietly prevent us from engaging with the deeper work of healing. So next time you instinctively reach for your headphones, just ask yourself, Do I want to feel something right now or avoid something? Because sometimes the most therapeutic sound is not a song, it's silence. While music fills our lives with emotion and meaning, silence plays an equally vital, though often overlooked, role in our mental and emotional well-being. In a world that seems perpetually noisy and overstimulating, silence can feel like an uncomfortable void. But neuroscience and psychology tell a very different story. Silence is not emptiness, it's a powerful healing space for the brain and the soul. When we stop external stimulation, like turn off music, step away from our screens, or simply just sit quietly with ourselves, the brain enters a unique state of activity governed by the default mode network, or the DMN. And it actually activates during what's known as restful wakefulness, which is kind of like daydreaming and self-reflection. And research shows that the DMN is crucial for internal thought processes, such as recalling memories, imagining the future, and processing emotions. In silence, the brain isn't idle. It's super busy integrating past experiences and making sense of our emotional landscape. One study on brain imaging helped uncover the DMN's role, and it really highlighted how this network is suppressed when we focus on tasks, but it becomes active when we rest and disconnect from external demands. Silence, therefore, it allows the brain to reset and engage in deeper processing that everyday noise and music might actually mask. Like I said earlier, silence isn't just a break from noise, it actively supports brain functions that promote mental clarity and emotional balance. Silence also supports creativity. Without constant auditory input, the mind can wander freely, allowing novel ideas to emerge. Psychologist Sandy Mann's research indicates that brief moments of silence can significantly boost divergent thinking, and this is the kind of creative thinking that generates many solutions to a problem. Silence also aids emotional regulation. When the brain isn't busy processing external stimuli, it can better process internal signals and emotions. This is why meditation, mindfulness, and quiet reflection are widely used tools for reducing anxiety, improving mood, and increasing emotional resilience. But beyond neuroscience, silence holds profound psychological and spiritual meaning across many different cultures. Many spiritual traditions, whether Buddhist, Christian, or even indigenous practices, they emphasize silence as a pathway to insight, healing, and connection to the self, or even to the divine. In silence, we encounter the rawness of our experience without any distraction, and that creates this kind of sacred space for introspection and renewal. Psychologically, silence allows for self-awareness. It invites us to listen to our inner dialogue, acknowledge unspoken feelings, and confront truths that we might otherwise avoid. And this process is fundamental to growth, healing, and authenticity. And believe me, I know that while silence can feel uncomfortable or even intimidating in our noisy modern lives, it offers a scientifically supported way to enhance memory, spark creativity, and regulate emotions. Incorporating intentional silence, whether that's through quiet moments at home, meditation, or just walks out in nature, it can recharge not just your brain, but your emotional and spiritual self. Embracing silence might just be the reset that your mind needs in a world overflowing with noise. And I think what's interesting is it's not just listeners who need silence. Artists do too. Some of the most celebrated musicians and composers intentionally step away from music to reconnect with themselves, their creativity, and their purpose. These creative breaks aren't just about abandoning music, they're about recharging. Silence gives artists room to feel, to observe, and to process life without turning it immediately into sound. And as listeners, we can do the same. We often think that we need music to feel inspired or motivated, but sometimes it's the absence of music that brings fresh ideas and emotional clarity. Creativity, whether you're writing, problem solving, or simply just figuring out your next step in life. It often thrives in those quiet moments. In fact, studies on mind wandering and creativity show that the brain is more likely to generate original ideas when it isn't actively focused on external input. And that's exactly what silence allows. It creates a mental space for unexpected connections, insights, and emotional breakthroughs. So if you're feeling stuck, uninspired, or emotionally flat, not only might you need a break from listening, but you might need to reconnect with what really matters. In a world where music is constantly available, it's easy to lose sight of how we listen. The key to preserving music's emotional power and avoiding overstimulation, I think, lies in cultivating balance between intentional listening and mindful silence. Intentional listening means actively engaging with the music that you choose. So it's about selecting songs that resonate with your current mood or purpose, focusing your attention fully on the sound, lyrics, and emotions, just allowing yourself to be moved or inspired. And this contrasts sharply with passive listening, when music is simply filling space, played as background noise while we multitask or distract ourselves. Research shows that focused attention enhances emotional and cognitive processing of music. And actually, deep listening activates emotional and memory-related brain regions more strongly than distracted listening. So, in other words, you get more out of music when you're really present. Developing these intentional listening habits can restore the meaningfulness of music and reduce the risk of emotional burnout from overstimulation. Just like intermittent fasting helps the body reset and restore, sonic fasting, so periods without music or sound stimulation, it gives your auditory system and brain a chance to recover. This doesn't mean cutting out music completely. No. I'm definitely not recommending that. Please don't do that. It's definitely not why you're listening to this podcast, but rather, I mean, scheduling deliberate quiet times throughout your day or week. So think about those low stimulation rituals like meditative breathing, nature walks without headphones, or just quiet reading time. These all create space for the brain's default mode network to work. And these moments help recalibrate your emotional responses and enhance mental clarity. So, just before we wrap up, I want to give you some concrete, practical ways to find balance in your relationship with music. So, starting off with one simple approach, which is try starting your day with one no music morning a week, or taking walks without headphones. Really experiencing quiet or natural ambient sounds first thing in the morning can help you tune into your own thoughts and set a calm, focused tone for the day. Another helpful strategy is to intentionally include ambient or silent moments within your playlists. So, for example, mixing in tracks of soft nature sounds, white noise, or even brief pauses of silence can give your brain much needed breathing space between songs and actually helping to prevent sensory overload. I think this one is really smart, and I think it's a really cool thing to have a play around with as well. So try it out and let me know. But finally, practicing deep listening, where you dedicate time to focus fully on the music without distractions like screens or multitasking. And this can really just transform your listening experience. So by paying close attention to the lyrics, instrumentation, rhythms, and your emotional responses, you deepen your connection to the music and allow it to have a more meaningful impact rather than simply just acting as background noise. Finding a healthy balance between sound and silence, between active and passive listening, it helps sustain your emotional connection to music over time. It prevents burnout, sharpens your attention, and allows music to continue being that source of joy, comfort, and inspiration, rather than turning into noise fatigue. So I'll leave you with this question to reflect on. When was the last time that you truly embraced silence? Not just as an absence of sound, but as a moment of healing and presence. Now, I'm definitely the biggest advocate for music listening out there, but as someone who used music to avoid a lot of thoughts and feelings in my life for a long time, I wanted to put this out there because if it could encourage anyone else out there going through the same thing to really be comfortable with silence and as a consequence, enjoy music even more, I think that's the most important thing. But that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Sound Mind. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this one because I know that everyone listening is such a big music lover, and yeah, it might be a bit of a controversial topic telling you to embrace more silence, but honestly, I think it's something worth reflecting on. We do live in such a chaotic, filled world, and really, I think we all wish that we could take a step back at some moment during the day from all of that hyperstimulation. But if you have enjoyed the episode, please rate or review on wherever you're listening and share it with someone who loves music just as much as you do, or maybe listens to too much music? Question mark? I would love to know your thoughts on this episode, so please do come and say hi over on Instagram and Threads at the Sound Mind Talks and join the discussion. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. But until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on the Sound Mind.